Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Favorito. Welcome to the latest in the series of Hangouts today and tomorrow. I just wanted to remind everybody, if you would like to ask a question of our panelists as we go along, it's hashtag sportsconf, hashtag sportsconf on Twitter. The topic we're going to talk about for the next half hour is the rise of over-the-top and personalization of sports media and really kind of TV everywhere. How we've gotten to where we are and where we think this is going to go forward. We've got a pretty interesting panel of people on the programming side, on the venture capital side, and some pretty smart people who've been involved in this before. Phil Sharpe, SVP, Client Strategy and Engagement for Omnigon. Chris Russo, who's now the CEO and founder of Fifth Generation Sports. And David Aufhauser, who's the GM and VP of Pac12 Digital and the Pac12 Networks. So welcome, guys. Everybody hear me?
Yeah, hey, Joe.
So why don't we take just kind of a quick couple minutes and go around. Phil, why don't you kind of start us off with a little bit of your background, what you're doing now, and then kind of just 30 seconds on where you think, how we've gotten to where we are with whether it's over-the-top programming or kind of what the next step is going to be for TV everywhere.
All right, Joe. Hey, everybody. So I'm Phil Sharpe. I'm with Omnigon Communications. I've been there since the start of January. Omnigon is a digital consultancy. We work with clients predominantly in the sports space, also in media and entertainment. We do strategic consulting, we do solution consulting, and creative consulting. So we've worked with some pretty big brands in the industry, as you can see if you go to our website and take a look. My background, Joe, I was, prior to Omnigon, 15 years with Turner Broadcasting, many of that at Turner Sports, where I worked with NASCAR, PGA Tour, the NBA, and several smaller leagues. David actually did some work with the Pac-12 about 6 years ago when I was with a venture called Play On Sports. Oh. So as far as OTT goes and video, let's just say, of sports and media over the top, been involved with it probably for 15 years now. I think what obviously brought it about was the reduction in distribution costs, the reduction in production costs, which kind of made it so that far more folks could produce content and distribute it to a far more targeted audience. So I'll just leave it at that and say that's my experience and where we're at today.
Cool. So David, obviously, since Larry Scott's come on as Pac-12 commissioner, there's been much more of a global focus and really a focus with the Pac-12 network launching on how you give more content to more people. Why don't you kind of touch on where the Pac-12 network is now, but also give us a little bit of how you've gotten to where you are personally.
Sure. Again, I'm David Aufhauser. I'm the general manager and vice president for Pac-12 Digital, which is part of Pac-12 Networks. I'm responsible for everything digital across the Pac-12, as well as some project stuff with the conference itself. So Pac-12 Networks is the brainchild of Larry Scott. And we were born about 3 years ago as an independent but wholly owned media company by the presidents of the universities. So we're 100% owned by the conference and the 12 universities making up the Pac-12. We have 7 television networks, a national network, and 6 regional networks that align with the sort of rivalry schools, if you will, across the Pac-12. We have a digital network, and we have a sponsorship and events group. And our mission at the end of the day is to connect fans with the student athletes, with the coaches, and with the schools that they love across the board by providing them with access they could not get in other ways. So we produce 850 live events on linear television and television everywhere every year. We produce another 400 to 500 live streamed events every year. We have shoulder programming both on linear and on digital. We have original programming both on linear and on digital, and we manage the network of websites and mobile web properties across the 12 schools as well. So
it's a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff, a lot of fun, but again, at the end of the day, this is about our fans and about connecting them with the student athletes and the coaches and the schools.
So Chris, obviously you were there kind of in the infancy of NFL Digital. When you worked for the network, you went off and launched what eventually became Big League Sports, which was sold to USA Today. And now, you've been involved in a whole lot of things. The latest is fifth generation sports. So from your perspective, especially from a league standpoint and from a property standpoint, how did we get to where we are? And then tell everybody a little bit about fifth generation sports and some of the other things you're working on right now, whether it's Monumental or some of the other projects.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you said how we've gotten to where we are in terms of the OTT business?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think what you have now, Joe, is really almost a frenzy in terms of the OTT business. I think almost every sports league, every media company, every independent sports property thinking about how they reach consumers directly and try to make a business of it through video distribution. I think what's happened is a lot of the big TV deals have been done, and many of those deals are extending out for 10, 15 years in some cases. So now both the property owners and the media companies are saying, what else can we do? How can we reach fans directly through new kinds of video opportunities? And with the growth of Netflix and Hulu and the younger generation experiencing content primarily through digital platforms, I think sports entities want to take advantage of it. I think we're in the early innings of the OTT space, but virtually every meeting I have with a property, a league, an entrepreneurial company, the concept of OTT is part of the discussion, and everyone's looking to figure out how they can make money in this new area.
Cool. So I'll throw this out to the three of you guys. How does it make money? I mean, is there a point where the Pac12 network or the YES network or the NFL or the NBA or Major League Soccer are looking at this and saying, we want to give as much content because content's important, but when is the point where you reach the opportunity to say, we have content and then individual people are going to pay for it?
Well, that's a good question. I think that we're in the very, very beginning of a lot of these changes, certainly within sports. I think sports and live sports, because of the importance of live content to MSOs, it's a little bit different than I think the entertainment content where people are already time shifting and now people want to watch specific shows as opposed to channels, and there's a lot going on. But I think the business models are not going to change quite as fast, I believe, in sports. So our emphasis today is really on television everywhere. So the ability to watch what you are subscribing to as a cable provider on any device, using your relationship that you have with your MSO to be able to access that on your iPhone, on your Android phone, on your Xbox, on your PC, whatever, via mobile web, whatever it may be, and really focusing on that. And certainly, I believe, as Chris mentioned, that the OTT market is coming, and I think there are certain businesses where having a direct-to-consumer piece of that is going to be important. But I think one thing, and you two can comment on this, but when you talk about OTT, there's really, there's a bunch of different models, but we look at it as there's two models to OTT. One is direct-to-consumer, so creating some sort of subscription or service where the rights owner has a direct relationship with their customer. The other is OTT through distribution partners, right? So you could do an OTT service with with an existing MSO. You've seen Dish launch this with Sling TV as the first example. You could do an OTT service with an up-and-comer new entrant to the market who hasn't entered the market yet, like a Google or an Amazon or someone like that. And so those are two different flavors of OTT. But again, I think for mainstream sports, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, especially on the direct-to-consumer piece. I think that'll, while it's inevitable in some areas, I think sports will be, at least mainstream sports will be a little bit longer than people think.
Mm-hmm. So Phil, in terms of what people will pay, do you see a difference in the way the American consumer views this, whether it's micropayments or specific content versus a global audience? Is there a difference, or is it the same?
So I'd like to address that by kind of going back a moment there to your prior question. It's interesting, just to add to what David was saying, I think if you look at the model that the NBA pursued with League Pass, and the way, to David's point, there's a distribution through the MVPDs, there's a distribution that's direct, and now you start to see, you know, almost a direct-to-consumer distribution in regions where they may not have media rights agreements. So I think if you're interested in looking at something like that as a model for a major league, take a look at what the NBA has done with that. From a global versus national audience, I make 3 points, and I'll make them briefly. One, I think each business property, each sports property, kind of has to work out what is right for it from a business model, like David was presenting those different business models. I think you have to determine what you're trying to achieve. Do you have an audience that is not able to access your content now? And if so, you can probably go direct to consumer, or you can leverage someone who may have marketing clout and you know, customer support clout and go through them. If you already have a direct-to-consumer offering, you can still go over the top, and this is where the term over the top gets kind of vague, I think, in some ways, because, you know, taking snippets and pushing them out over social media, working with an MCN or creating your own channel on YouTube and things like that to put highlights, etc., is kind of a barker channel, I think is a very effective way to go beyond your traditional audience or fan base to reach broader. What we're seeing on a global basis is people adapting to the region. So, for example, if you were to look in the African region, you will see various ranges of capability of the audience, and brands wanting to reach into that or into maybe Asia, Indonesia, Australasia, those areas, are adapting how they go over the top based on the capabilities of the audience and consumers there. Don't they have smartphone? Is pay TV dominant, or is it free to air? You know, what's the internet capability of the audience? So it very much is it depends, and it depends on multiple factors, both from the sports brand's perspective and from the audience capability perspective.
So, hey, Chris, before you jump in, you mind if I add one thing? Phil, I think your point on the global aspect is actually really good. I hadn't covered that, and I think it's going to be very different. I think direct-to-consumer and OTT globally, especially for us U.S.-based you know, media properties, is really, really important. So we have a partnership with YouTube, and we are going, you know, OTT through a subscription service with YouTube for our 24/7 live linear channel in 36 markets, you know, across the world. And so we've gone that route outside the United States already. In this case, with YouTube, specifically, as you mentioned, to leverage their marketing cloud.
Yep.
So David, have you done that already?
We've done that already. Yes.
That's been your response.
Sign up today.
Have you found Ducks fans in China that you didn't know existed?
Well, unfortunately, YouTube is not in China.
Oh, oops,
we actually have it very different.
Ducks fans in Australia.
Well, that's okay. No, we do have a partnership with a company called Lit TV in China. So we do some over the top in China with Lit TV, specifically around basketball. But China's a little bit different. But we have found Ducks fans all over the world, and they've been pretty excited, especially with you know, during football season.
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, having worked at a league, obviously, and been there kind of the birth of NFL Digital, and now, do you think that there'll be a point where every league, team, media company will have their own network providing programming, and how do you envision that working to kind of keep it organized for everybody, where people can make money?
Yeah, I mean, I think every and sports brand will want to have some form of their own channel. In effect, they already have that already, in the sense that you can go to these websites and get, you know, short-form video content. I think the question is, to what degree does that become really a lot more robust and become de facto more akin to a programming network? And part of the compelling nature of that, or not the compelling nature of that, is whether you have live game programming or not. And that really tends to be the tipping point in sports. Once programming on, really start getting lots of eyeballs. The issue is that a lot of those are long-term deals, some from the leagues and teams, that they don't want to ruin the rights deals on the TV side, which are a lot more money in the short run, at least. Some form of question will bust. Really, at the end of the day, is going to depend upon whether live game rights get put into these packages or not, whether the economics can sustain that.
Okay. David, how much is this tied to millennials and how millennials will engage versus people who are a little bit older? Is TV everywhere easier for them? Is it more adaptable? And then how do you weigh that out across your alumni network and all the other people who may be accessing Pac-12 programming?
I think that's a great question. I think right now the demographics for TV everywhere absolutely skew younger than linear on average, right? So it's the same content, accessed via different devices. But yeah, so where that becomes important are really, there are a few ways. One is from an advertiser perspective and sponsorship, right? We can sell and target different types of sponsorships and ads via TV everywhere and dynamic ad insertion than say we would on linear channel. And that's something we can take advantage of for advertisers and should open up a whole set of ways in which we can target customers from that perspective. From the fan perspective, again, for us, it's about delivering to all of our fans our content regardless of how they want to consume it. And that's something that's really important to us. We have a huge, broad array of fans in college sports. We don't just televise and produce television and basketball. With 850 live events, we're covering water polo and women's gymnastics and softball and baseball and volleyball.
Hockey soon too, probably.
And probably soon, exactly. So those may be niche sports, but when you aggregate that audience and you attack that very passionate fan base, it's just really important for us to provide them access to that content. So I'll give you an example. So in the next week or so, we're launching the ability for our fans to use Chromecast, with their iOS and their Android apps. And we've had a few passionate fans who literally gave us a 1-star, not because they didn't like our app, but because they said, hey, Chromecast doesn't work. So yesterday we said, hey, we gave them beta access to our Chromecast app and said, hey, you said you'd give us 5 stars if we launched Chromecast, and literally within 5 minutes they said, hey, we're slinging to Chromecast, and went in and changed their rating. So we're listening to fans. Those fans obviously were the younger millennials. Bring it back to your question. So again, we need to listen to all of our fans. The older alumni are just as important as the millennials for us.
Joe, if I could just do one thing, Joe. There is a difference, Joe, between I think the purpose of TV everywhere and then the purpose in a way of OTT, because I think TV everywhere essentially lets the fan get the content wherever he or she is, whatever device, whereas OTT may actually be serving a market that is not subscribing to cable, and that market may be getting bigger over time as millennials decide they don't want to pay $100 a month. So the question becomes, for sports properties, are we going to be able to serve those people who have decided, for whatever reason, not by cable or satellite? Are we going to serve them with something, or are we not going to serve them because by serving them we're cannibalizing our cable business, which is paying us a lot of money? And so that's really kind of the question. As that number of people gets bigger and bigger who is cutting the cord, how does sports league serve or not serve that audience?
I think that is articulated the challenge that we face every day in a much better way than I could articulate it. Thanks, Chris.
Phil, when you go from
that is spot on.
Phil, when you go from the properties, which we've just kind of talked about, and the content, what about brands? I mean, how are brands going to deal with this? And are there brands that you see that are doing a good job now of trying to figure out this whole kind of mishigas that's out there for them?
So, Joe, when you say brands, can you give me, not wanting to lay anybody in there, but are you talking about a sports brand, or are you talking about a partner or sponsor brand?
A sponsor brand, so Budweiser or
So what I think OTT brings, and it's interesting, I think we could have a conversation around what Chris just said and keep that rolling for a while. It's a good topic. But I think to go to where sponsor activation comes in, one thing OTT brings with it, and this is kind of like a double-edged sword, of course, is tracking, analytics, and targeting. So I think a lot of sports brands are now able, so let me back up. I think first of all with OTT or any kind of video, once sports brands saw that they could distribute, and I'm not talking about the big brands right now that have media deals, but I'm talking about brands that didn't have media deals. Once they saw they could distribute video, I think their first reaction was, we've got to make money off this, right? So I think we've come across quite a few brands where the board kind of came in and said, all right, we're going to have a subscription product, people will pay for this. But at the same time, I think they should realize there's a much bigger audience out there beyond that subscription audience that they could reach. And they've got to blend this into what is their real strategic intent as a brand. What are they struggling with? Where's their growth? What are they trying to do? And this comes to brand activation for sponsors. And several sports brands, a major significant part of their revenue is from their partners, their sponsors, etc. And so leveraging targeted, let's call it membership, rather than subscription. So maybe it's not paid, but you register to see video and register to get content, then maybe you can make, as a sports brand, more revenue by actually then offering that as a lever to your activation, for activation to your partners and sponsors. Because as we all know, sports fans very avidly follow the partners and sponsors associated with those sports brands. So there's a whole different way of looking at the business model there that we see quite a few sports brands now evolving to, from that initial, we just have to make money off the video perspective.
Right. David, have you seen some brands come in and say, man, I want to be involved with this, whatever you have going forward?
Yeah, you know, it's very interesting. I think brands, some brands are really sophisticated and some are trying to figure it out. And what we've seen that I think has been interesting, especially as we juxtapose, you know, TV everywhere, if you will, versus OTT, and when you layer on, you know, how do brands look at and connect with millennials specifically, you have to bring social media into the equation, and it's a really important piece. And figuring out how to layer that on in a way where you're giving just enough content to bring fans back to whatever service you might have, and carrying a brand with that and figuring that out. We've done a lot of experimenting with the usual suspects, you know, Twitters, Facebooks, even Snapchats of the world, but also bringing a brand, you know, a brand like BlackRock, who's really been, you know, an interesting brand to try to go after a younger audience. But you know, they've done some, you know, some really interesting things with us, and I think that we're really just starting to, you know, other than a few exceptions, you know, brands are really just starting to figure this out. And I don't think they've thought through, you know, OTT versus TV everywhere. They're thinking about, okay, I have an audience that I want to connect with. Sports is a means on which to do that. What is the best way to do that?
Mm-hmm. So Chris, we touched a little bit on the NBA, ESPN TV deal, where OTT may have been involved or maybe involved more. And, you know, David just touched on the fact that, you know, we got to kind of think a little bit more towards the future. So do you see a point where OTT playing a bigger role in other TV rights negotiations between sports leagues and media companies? And how do you think that will play out from what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think ESPN has been, I guess, aggressive early in the sense that in the context of these NBA discussions, at least what was reported publicly, there was an agreement to build an OTT network together over time that I assume will have other programming as well. And I expect that will ultimately sort of provide a catalyst for other media companies to also say, when they sign up league deals or they pay for rights, they want OTT rights as well, in addition to getting web rights and in addition to getting other kinds of rights in terms of mobile rights or TV everywhere rights. So I do expect that it will continue. I think I may have just got knocked off. You hear me still?
Oh, we lost you.
No, he's still there.
Is he? Okay.
Oh, maybe not.
So is this a question, and this is actually for all of you guys, is it a question for kind of reinventing the negotiation wheel at this point? Like, David, when you guys have gone out and when you guys talk to networks, is it something that you're saying, hey, by the way, we need to now put this in going forward, or we need to redo our deals, or is it something that is kind of progressing along?
I think
Sorry, Joe.
We're at the very beginning stages of looking at that. I think right now, certainly in my world as head of digital, my world, I'm very focused on the television everywhere aspect, and we're only, you got to remember, we're in our third year. We're still sort of in startup mode, if you will, and
but you guys are the old guys by this point.
Right. I mean, look, my focus right now is on getting our content to as many fans as possible. Mm-hmm. And so that means, distribution through as many means as possible. And on the linear side, that means partnering with all the usual suspects. On the digital side, it means offering television everywhere so that any fan who's a subscriber can do that. And then for fans who aren't subscribers, it means providing mechanisms for them to connect with our fans in different ways, and hopefully enticing them to become subscribers and to get access to our content. And that, we again do that a little differently internationally with our YouTube service than we do, domestically, where our focus right now is on television everywhere.
Cool. I know we're going to get short on time. I had one other question. What about the athlete in general? I mean, obviously on the college side, this has been an issue. We've seen what's happened with some athletes coming forward and saying, I want to control all my own rights and my own brand. You've got the Players Tribune and Sports Blog and Medium out and the Cauldron out there now trying to deal with players and their own voices. Do you guys, any of you ever think that it will get to that point where players can control their own, whether it's TV everywhere, whether it's OTT, and then that gets factored into the equation as well?
I think that if there are probably certain players that can ultimately create their own channels in terms of the level of their popularity, in terms of their presence. The question is whether they would have access to game video or whether those programming outlets would be more about behind the scenes and other kinds of programming that wasn't on the field. Clearly, with social media, players have become brands for fans. Fans follow them. I think there's a lot of authenticity in what's happening in social media with athletes. The question is there enough compelling content for players to create their own channels? That's something that remains to be seen.
Phil, you have any thoughts on that?
No, I pretty much agree with Chris there. There's nothing to really disagree with. To his point, there are certain ones, and you see it on social media now, the big numbers, the large followers, follower numbers, follow the popular athletes. It'll shift in time, I believe. And again, to a point that Chris made, there are rights agreements between leagues and teams and athletes too, and they may get renegotiated in time. But I don't think it's anything we haven't seen before, and I think it'll just continue to evolve.
Mm-hmm. We've seen, obviously, the massive numbers. Well, some people have seen the massive numbers the Cricket World Cup brought in this past week with India and Pakistan playing. How does that factor into an American audience going forward, where you've got a very passionate but core following? Is it something that we need to watch more when it comes to this type of programming, or is it something that's much more of a niche than we would really understand?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that. I mean, I think OTT allows every niche sport, in a sense, to have its own network. But I think that the economics of that are what gets tricky, because it's hard to support that with advertising. Although there can be targeted advertising, you've really got to find content that consumers are willing to pay for. And I think in certain areas in sports and niches that will happen, and in others I think it'll be more difficult. But I don't think you can rely on ad support initially to make that work, because the advertisers are just getting into the game. So I think it's really about finding content people are willing to pay for.
I would,
so it is paid content.
Yeah, I would go ahead. I think that's something fairly unique to sports too. Is, fans are mostly avid fans of any sport, of any team, whatever. There are clearly avid fans. Some work we did several years ago was with a fairly obscure sports organization. It was a world organization. And we did, in the early days, do an OTT of their world championship and charged a subscription fee. And personally, I was extremely surprised at the price elasticity or the price tolerance of the fans. I mean, if you look at what ESPN is charging now, for example, for the World Cricket ad, I think it's a very valuable asset. I think it's a fair price for the games you get, especially when you do kind of an opportunity cost analysis, which is, my next best option is to try and fly and attend all of these, and that's ridiculously expensive for me. So it's really a good deal. And what we found is, several $100s for an exclusive world content delivered over the top. And that way, to Chris's point, you wouldn't try and run that through advertisers because the audience numbers aren't big enough to appeal to them. But at the same time, you can get significant amount of money to reinvest back into the sport by doing that. I was very surprised when I saw that. Very pleasantly surprised.
So the investment for something like that would come from the governing body or the event organizer versus an advertiser or a network, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. What about so what kind of is the next step, David, that you're seeing going forward with TV everywhere? From an engagement standpoint, is it how do you make money on it, and kind of what's the next thing that we're going to see from the Pac-12 that once again will help lead everybody else to where it's going to go, especially in the college space?
Yeah, so for us, TV everywhere being the focus right now. A couple questions there. So first, from a monetization standpoint, part of the monetization of TV everywhere is built into overall distribution. The other part of the monetization around TV everywhere is what I alluded to earlier, which is sponsors and advertisers being able to target a different audience, if you will, right? A younger audience, generally speaking. So those are the two components, and I think that's something that you'll see us, maybe behind the scenes a little bit, but that's something you'll see us doing potentially in a little bit of a different way through some things we're working on around dynamic ad insertion and different types of ad units and how you can interact with fans during those commercial breaks in an online world that you just can't in TV. And so that's something that we're experimenting with. Second thing, is that you'll see from us is just continuing to expand platforms, right? So today we're available on iOS, Android, mobile web. Like I said, in the next week we are launching our Chromecast, and so you'll just see a rollout of the usual suspects around that. And then I think the next piece is how do you overlay what I would call the second screen experiences. But for us, I think second screen and first screen really merge into a single experience. So how do you overlay other content to complement that first screen experience? And we're a ways away from doing that yet, but those are the types of things that we're thinking about and trying to do that in innovative ways, again, to engage and connect fans. But that, I think, is something you'll see us try to lead in and bring the best of what has existed out there, but do it a little bit differently.
So taking the Pac-12 network out of the picture, we talked a little bit about the NBA. So Chris and Phil, who else is doing a good job in the space, who you're kind of following, and who should people kind of be looking at as they want answers in the space?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think obviously the WWE has gotten a lot of attention for its efforts, has driven a lot of subscribers. That model's interesting because they've actually put in pay-per-view events into the mix, which provides additional value, but also creates, certain business issues as well. But that's certainly one to watch and has achieved certainly a lot of subscribers, and I think everyone's looking at that closely. I think UFC has done a good job. I think, obviously I think the NBA and ESPN will strike an interesting model. I think it's yet to be seen, all of the details on that, but I think that's interesting. I think you saw just a couple of days ago the PGA Tour announce a new venture with Bedrocket around golf and trying to bring golf to a younger generation. So I think there's a lot of interesting ones. I work with Monumental Sports and Entertainment in D.C. They do a very nice job behind the scenes video content in an OTT type environment for fans. So I think you're seeing OTT happen at the league level and at the team level, and I think you're going to see now a lot of venture capital and new kinds of investment in OTT channels that aren't even really tied to league rights, but are really out there creating new forms and new niches of content. So it's an exciting time.
So Phil, who else are you kind of following from that perspective?
Mute.
I would add to the list. I always follow what the NBC folks are doing. I think NBC Sports pushes the envelope in terms of taking their property rights, their rights with leagues, with teams, etc., and expanding them, including over an OTT medium. I think we'll see quite a bit from winter sports. I think you're going to see a lot of Olympic sports associations and bodies go for more of an OTT perspective. So I'm keeping my eye on what I would call those non-primetime sports that we've seen in the past on a global basis, and seeing them really come out over the top, aided by ESPN, NBC, and others like that.
Okay. So real briefly, you touched on the Olympics a little bit. How will the Olympics handle this going forward? Not probably for 2016, but is there a way that NBC is going to deal with this going forward when we get to 2018, 2020, and 2024?
I'm going to echo Chris here and say I think it's a tremendously exciting time. And really, to echo something David said, the first step in OTT is just taking your content and putting it over the top. But really, from a sports perspective, there are two more dimensions. One is the one that David laid out, which is that kind of second screen concept, widget concept, overlay concept, where you can let the audience control how much more information they get and gather about this. But let's not forget the third point about this, too, that it's truly interactive. And because of that, we can remember those settings and things can be personalized. So I think NBC, and I'm bragging on them, but I just think they did a wonderful job with the Olympics several years ago. I think they continue to push the envelope. I think that's why the Olympics probably did the deal they did with them, because of the promises what's yet to come. And I'm convinced we'll see a lot more engaging content from them. And I think it will address the casual fan, the avid fan, and various different kinds of fan with different forms of delivery and different experiences.
Great. Oops, sorry. So we've got 1 or 2 minutes left. What I'd like to do is go to the three of you gentlemen, just kind of start with Chris on just some words of wisdom for people who are looking in the space and kind of who they should be following, and more importantly, where do you think we're going to be, if we did the same conference a year from now, which we will do, obviously.
Yeah, I guess my words of wisdom are, make sure that you have a business model going into it that makes sense. I think there's going to be a lot of money thrown at ideas that don't necessarily make sense in the short run. And I think.
We lost Chris. You still there?
I think we lost him.
We'll come back to Chris.
So sorry. Repeat the question.
So where a year from now, number one, who are you following? who do you like? And number two is, a year from now, where do you think we're going to be if we had the same conversation in terms of TV everywhere for sports and OTT?
Okay. Well, for me, those two questions kind of go together. From a following standpoint, I have always thought that the NBA has been a leader in everything digital. They were the first league on YouTube. They've really been, I think, they're first to embrace social media. They've obviously been doing League Pass, so I follow the NBA. I think Major League Baseball Advanced Media does, generally speaking, live content and has embraced mobile and the in-stadium experience with, better than, as well or better than anyone, and certainly sets the tone there. And I actually agree with Phil that one of the interesting things to follow going forward is going to be some of these niche sports and the ability to go direct to consumer, or quite frankly through the MCN type of content, on YouTube and whatnot. A year from now, I think that we'll be on the cusp, and if it hasn't already happened, but we'll be on the cusp of talking about what I call the next wave of media properties who are going to get into the sports space. And I put Amazon, Google /YouTube, Netflix. There's probably a couple others that I'm missing in there. It's been talked about for years. Maybe next year is 1 or 2 years too early, but it'll certainly be a topic of conversation a year from now. And out of those, I actually will predict that that Amazon will be a big player, more than anybody realizes. They bought a company called Twitch, which is a live gaming company. But what most people don't realize is what they really bought is a live platform, probably the largest live streaming platform in the world. Maybe Major League Baseball is right up there with them in terms of amount of hours and content streamed. But when you talk about live content, I believe Amazon owns probably the largest live platform in the world, and so it'll be interesting to see how they play with that.
Cool. And Phil, you get the last word. Where are we going to be in a year, in your opinion? To Rio, obviously.
Boy, I hate saying what may happen and may not. I think I'm going to piggyback off what David said and kind of build on it. I think in China especially, and in some of the other areas of the world, we'll see a more rapid move towards the kind of situation David's talking about, where folks who we would have in the past said were not traditional players in this space will become significant dominant players in this space.
Okay. Any other parting shots before we've got about a minute left? What people should be watching or doing? Chris, we lost you there for a second when you were speaking.
Yeah, I guess I would look more. I mean, I do agree with David that over time, Amazon and Netflix and other digital companies getting involved in the sports space. But what I'm going to be looking at over the next 12 to 18 months is all of the independent, niche, kind of avant-garde kind of sports properties and businesses making a way to create opportunities around OTT. I think in a year from now, we're going to be talking about some names that we hadn't talked about yet. Whether they can ultimately be great businesses or not, who knows? But I think there's going to be a lot of ambition and a lot of money put into some alternative OTT networks over the next 12 to 18 months.
So those who are into the Ultimate Jousting Network, please reach out to Chris Russo and he'll take care of you right away.
Joe, I do have kind of one other thing to add maybe, and that is I think we should keep an eye on one or two of the large agencies whose large clients are looking to increase their activation in sports, and I think we'll see them spending and maybe developing media brands that represent their clients' interests in these sports. I think we'll see that in the next year too. Great.
Chris, David, and Phil, thank you for joining us. We went a little bit over, but it was obviously very intriguing. For everyone who's watching online, again, it's #SportsConference. This will be archived, and if you have questions specifically for any of the panelists, please let us know, and we'll be able to get those answered later on in the day. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Chris. Hopefully I'll see you guys in New York.
All right. See you soon. Bye.